And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is not just an accomplished counterterrorism person, but a good friend of mine through the years. We've served together. Greg Ehrie is the Chief Security Officer for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. You know, when you think of them in terms of counterterrorism, it doesn't jump to the top of the list, but if you know your counterterrorism history, it does. The plot to blow up the bridges and tunnels, Port Authority responsibility to protect them. The bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993, Port Authority ran that property. The 9/11 attacks, it is because it is an agency that is a bi-state agency that runs the largest pieces of critical infrastructure connected to transportation in New York, a place that has also, unfortunately, as it served millions of people, also been recurring on the target list. Greg, he is a product of New York. He's been everywhere, but he starts here in Manhattan College studying journalism. Who would leave journalism to go to the FBI? I can't tell you, but you know, he made this wrong turn, I guess. But first, in the US Air Force, serving his country in places like Somalia, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, then to the FBI Academy, leaving the Air Force. And, you know, in the FBI Academy in 1998, he's there about 3 months when an announcement that didn't receive much attention from a guy that most people hadn't heard of comes out of Afghanistan. Someone named Osama bin Laden declared war on the United States, predicting a black day for America. He did that in an interview with Peter Bergen, who we will see later here today on this stage, and a later interview with me. I say a later interview because Peter Bergen always points out his was first. Greg went to the New York office, which became the center of counterterrorism efforts in the FBI. It's where the bin Laden case was opened, and that will also be a theme that recurs today. And after 9/11, he was on the Pent Bomb Task Force, which took on the largest terrorism case in the history of this country. Counterterrorism division at FBI headquarters, then deployed to the Middle East to study Arabic language and cultures. He was there for a year. Back to the New York office, just in time to deal with the Times Square truck bomb that, thank God, was stopped before it went off, and had the suspect who there was virtually no lead for in custody within 53 hours, working, of course, with the NYPD and its people on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. After that, understanding that all terrorism is local, went into the Domestic Terrorism Operations Center and got probably one of the clearest and earliest understandings within the FBI that terrorism doesn't have to emanate from overseas to touch people here, that our own groups are here, they are marinating, they are growing, and it's something that the Bureau needed to have attention on. He has served his country in so many ways, in war zones, from Somalia to places like Bahrain, other challenging places, Newark, New Jersey, for instance, but he has always been there. The thing I love about Greg is that on every holiday, no matter what the holiday is or how obscure, we would all get that email that had that saying, that patriotic saying, that piece of insight that had to do with that specific holiday, and those were words to live by. So Greg is a guy who's always thinking of his friends and his teammates as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Greg Ehrie.
Good morning. I'm afraid my remarks are going to be slightly less long than the introduction, so bear with me. When Ali called, and truth be told, we've known each other for over 20 years, when we came to the Bureau roughly around the same time and came to the New York office, he called a couple weeks ago and spoke with him and his staff and said, would you be willing to say something to speak here today? And I looked at the date, and I said, Ali, it's the day after, we're at the Port Authority, day after 9/11, we're going to be a little busy along with a lot of our colleagues. But he is, those of you know Ali, very persistent, and said, be important, it's a small, intimate event. Okay, I figured we were going to have coffee. I said, sure, Ali, how am I going to say no? Let's go do this. It's such an important thing. I saw some of the guest list, said I'd love to come out here. And then I saw he lined me up not only behind the secretary, but introduced by a legend in our career field, John Miller, and an icon, in order to give high-level remarks that I'm still trying to Wikipedia, what does that mean? High-level remarks. But it took a second, and I said, because knowing Ali, there's always a deeper level. And especially with this group, and it was so nice to see so many former and current colleagues as we were all coming in, to say, you know what a better time and what a better place. The day after a safe 9/11, and I'm going to mention that in a moment from the Port Authority perspective, along with some of our colleagues, but the fact that it's resonating with all of us. But it's also, if you don't know, you are sitting in the Perlman Performing Arts Center. And I remember, and I see, like Ehrie Rowe and John Miller and others in the audience, after the devastation of those attacks back in 2001, people got together and said, what can we do on this site? And I know, speaking for myself, I didn't think anything should be done. I wasn't sure yet. But there were people with the foresight who said, you know what? We're going to make this an open public place. We're going to show the world that we are not on our knees, that we are still in the fight, and we're not going to lock it down like a fortress. And as part of that, the last piece that was designed, and this is years, decades ago, they said the last thing we're going to build is a performing arts center. So New Yorkers have a way, the world has a way to come and see a show on this site. And this was finished this year. I said, that's an important event in itself, and it brings us all together. But the people in this audience also know that what I mentioned yesterday, that peaceful commemorative, that does not happen in a vacuum. We are still all alert. We still know what can happen. And I want to tell 2 points here. One, the Port Authority Police Department and the Port Authority as a whole. The Port Authority Police Department, for those of you who don't know, and as John mentioned, it's not a well-known police department, but it is the largest transportation police department in the world, about 2,500 people. They do critical infrastructure. But their history goes back further than that. At the Goethals and the Outer Bridge down near Staten Island, back in 1928, 40 men were put and named bridgemen and said, we need something from both states to protect this critical infrastructure. This is 1928. And that was the start of the Port Authority Police Department. Fast forward almost 100 years later, and now it's 2,500 people strong with the airport's largest airport complex in the world, the heaviest traveled bridge in the world, the heaviest traveled bus terminal in the world. And these are the men and women who do that every day. The story goes back a little further on 2001. There's a statistic that we're not proud of, and we hold it with a badge of honor, but it is that we've lost 37 people on that day, and that still stands as the largest single loss of life for any police department in the world in one day. And it's something we take a great responsibility for, and the word legacy comes to mind. I got here about 2 years ago, and I was privileged to be invited to a ceremony where we brought on several hundred officers to replace some that we hadn't had in a while during the COVID period. And as part of their graduation, we privately take each group and we go down to the 9/11 Museum, our very good partners. It's closed. And this is not an open ceremony. This is just for us. Family is not invited. And we take those new officers down there and we hand them their creds. And we point to that steel girder with that 37 pushed on that. And we point to the patch that they now wear on their shoulder since 9/11 with that 37. And we remind them, that was you. That was somebody just like you getting up for work on a 9/11 and coming here and not knowing that that was their last day, that they would never see their loved ones again. You carry that legacy with you. And on that day, 23 years ago, most agencies would have been on their knees and said, we need time. And we would have all respected that and said, you lost your superintendent, Fred Marone. You lost people like Captain Kathy Mazza, the first female head of the academy for the Port Authority Police Department, and 35 other members of service. Take a break, we'll cover for you. The Port Authority Police Department said no. No, we are going to show the world that we are here and we are not stopping. And transition to what you saw yesterday. I know it seemed seamless, and those of you who worked it with us, and I saw some of our NYPD partners, the FBI, you all know the scramble that goes on beyond that. But what you saw yesterday was a safe, peaceful, beautiful day that was the most attended by political powers. It is the only gathering of a current president, a current vice president, an upcoming election, the other nominees, vice president, 2 governors, senators, secretaries across the board. First time ever that we put them on an X, onto one of the most targeted places by terrorists in the world. And we said openly, we're going to do this. And it happened. And while that was going on, family members, the world, the country was able to commemorate their dead. And nobody had a problem with that. That's what we build 23 years later. I want to touch on just one other point, and it's a worry I have. And I'm glad that Ali is having this ceremony today, or this gathering, because it's so important that we have this. I'm reminded that we're sitting here when I talk about that graduation ceremony, that much like many of your agencies, the first responders from 2001 are slowly going to be phased out. Retirement, leave, God forbid get sick and they're not there anymore. In our department, we're keeping track of that. We'll know when that last first responder is no longer at the Port Authority. But we're also bringing people on. And I mentioned that ceremony because in a lot of those young officers are several daughters and sons of people who passed, of that 37, of other ones who have gone on. This gathering here, and I'll tell you what my fear is so critical. Because what I'm seeing is people who are forgetting. I had a meeting yesterday with several people talking about some security, and these are some learned folks who said there are no threats in the world anymore. That's all history. We're in a better place. It could never happen again. We use words like never again and never forget, and are we transitioning over to there's no chance anymore, we're all fine? And from what I see in our profession and our discipline, it couldn't be more wrong. The threats are growing. They're asymmetrical. They're what we always looked at, but they're also the new and growing threats, the protest, the contention here in the United States. And I'm not a political person, but I have to speak the truth from a security standpoint. We all have to be aware of that. Voltaire said a long time ago, to the living, we owe respect. To the dead, we owe only the truth. I would challenge this group to say part of your legacy, part of our responsibility collectively, is to look at the generations behind us and say, the words are important, but we're not going to be settled with those words. We're going to yell, scream, and pull, never forget and never again, because we have to pass that torch on to somebody else. And down the road, hopefully when we're all peacefully on a beach and we're in retirement, our sons, our daughters will be sitting here and remember that, and I will remember what I was taught, and will continue to fight this fight. I want to thank the Sufan Center and Ali personally for inviting me here today. I very much look forward to catching up with many of you and to hearing the conversation. Thank you.